Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to The Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from The Hindu and The Indian Express, especially from the perspective of UPSC Civil Service Examination. The first article deals with the issue of inequality and its impact on growth. The second article deals with tribal vulnerability. The third article deals with the green energy transition. The fourth article is related to the concept of glass ceiling. The fifth article is with respect to the James Webb Space Telescope. Finally, in the prelims snippet section, we'll have a look at some of the very important articles for the upcoming prelims exam. So the very first article deals with the issue of inequality and its impact on growth. So the recent debates have brought to the fore the discussions around inequality. And what we also see is that the famous Paris School of Economics has shown that the inequality in modern India is that of greater what it was in the colonial times. So this is related to GS2, social issues, GS3, inclusive growth. Now talking about inequality, what does inequality means? See, primarily inequality can be seen in two ways, that is income inequality and wealth inequality. Income inequality refers to the uneven distribution of incomes, that is wages, salaries, right, across the population. That is what we mean by the income inequality. The common metric to measure the income inequality is the Gini coefficient, where the 0 implies the state of perfect equality and 1 implies the state of perfect inequality. Right. Talking about the second type of inequality, this is wealth inequality. Now, what does it mean? It means the uneven distribution in terms of assets. What assets? They can be in terms of cash, they can be in terms of real estate, the possessions. That is what we call wealth inequality. Now, there is also one related term, and which I would like to mention here. It is the plutocracy. See, plutocracy is a society which is ruled or which is dominated by the wealthy individuals, where the wealthy individuals dictate the system of governance. So, in societies where you have extreme inequalities, we call that these societies are transforming into plutocracy, right? That is what. So, if you look at the graph, so it tells you that the richest 10% have 77.4% of the national wealth. You just see, richest 1%. And the poorest 60% have 4.7%. There's a stark sort of inequality in India when it comes to the wealth. Now, what are the general causes of inequality in India? See, the first is unequal access to education and skills. According to the World Bank, it says that this unequal access in education and skills, it leads to lowering the potential, the employability potential, the learning potential. Then you have got labor market rigidities. So according to the ILO, it says that these labor market rigidities, what do you mean by them? The complex rules and regulations, right? They actually hinder the social mobility, right? Then gender pay gap. According to the World Economic Forum, persistent gender pay gaps is one of the prime reasons for income inequality. According to the World Economic Forum's gender pay gap report of 2023, India has a gender pay gap of 28%, right? Then informal sector dominance, what does it mean? See, the ILO says that the informal sector dominates Indian labor force, and that is around 80%. And this is characterized by the informal sector, low wages, lack of social security. So it perpetuates inequality. Then you have got the system of the caste system and social exclusion. See, this legacy of exclusion, caste-based discrimination, has led to a condition where some of the economic opportunities for these marginalized sections, they are limited, right? Then you have got the inheritance and wealth accumulation. See, understand that those people who have inherited wealth, they are actually perpetuating inequality, right? Because the asset price are increasing, and it primarily benefits those who have these assets. For example, the real estate, right? So these are some of the general causes for inequality in India. Now, talking about the numbers, if you go into the numbers of inequality, what we see is that we have a famous report by World Inequality Lab, and that is the income and wealth inequality in India. It highlights the stark inequality in India. It says that the top 1% of Indians, their share in the national income in the year 2022 was 22.6%, right? So what we see is that their share has continuously increased. This share was just 11.6% in the year 1951, and it has increased to 22.6%. Then talking about the top 10% of the Indians, so the report says that their share in the total income in the year 2022 was 57.7%, and it has increased from 36.7% in the year 1951. So there has been an increase. Look at the graph that the top 1%, it has 22.6% of the national income. And then you have got the top 10%, it has 57.7, and it has increased. Just see this top 10%, it has increased from around 36.7%, right? And what we see is that the share of the bottom 50%, that the share of the bottom 50% of the Indians in the national income, it has been decreasing. It was around 15% in the year 2022, and initially in the year 1951, this share was around 20%. So see, it has been decreasing, the share of the bottom 15%, right? Next, what the report says is, if you look at the graph also, that the richest 1% share in the national income, it decreased till the year 1980, right? And it was around 6% at that time. But after the LPG reforms, especially after the liberalization, privatization and globalization reforms, the share of the top 1% has continuously increased, and it has come to 22.6%, right? What the report also says is that the share that went to the wealthiest 1% of Indians in the year 2022, it was a historic peak. And you won't even imagine that we even crossed the developed countries like USA or UK, right? So that is what the stark inequality in India is all about. Now, this article attributes the reason of inequality to one of the very important concepts of economy, and that is monopoly. It says that it is because of the monopoly that India is witnessing such huge inequality. So it says that what monopoly does. See, the monopoly creates dominant players with respect to particular business domains. And these dominant players, it gives these dominant players the freedom to allow the setting of prices of different goods and services, right? Now, if they are free to determine the prices of goods and services, they can set to a higher level so that they can increase their profit. And this sort of setting of prices, it depends on how powerful that particular monopoly is all about. The more the powerful the monopoly is, the greater the prices of goods and services, and the higher the profit which goes to that particular business domain. Now, what we see is that once the prices of goods and services increase, right, so it lowers the purchasing power of the majority of the sections of the society, which is sort of low and middle income, right? So what happens is that once you have got a majority of sections of society whose purchasing power is decreasing, it would lead to sort of hampering the growth, because majority of these sections is only one who is consuming, who is sort of increasing the consumption, right? Next, that the report, this article also talks about that there has been a phenomenon of greedflation. Now, this terminology can be important for your upcoming prelims. It says that especially in the developed countries, there have been sort of some business enterprises who have increased their prices of goods and services to unprecedented levels. Why? In order to compensate of their losses during the pandemic. And this is the prime reason that the developed countries are facing inflation, and that is termed as greedflation. That is the greed of these business enterprises. Now, what is the impact of this inequality on growth? See, please understand. What we see is that if an individual has adequate purchasing power, this would lead to more consumption, right? Then more consumption means what? It would lead to sort of more production. And this more production is happening because of the demand. Once you will have proper demand in the market, what would happen is that these producers would earn more. Once they would earn more, there would be more capital with them. And they can easily invest this capital for producing more goods and services. So what we see is that it's a virtuous cycle. It's a virtuous cycle. What I mean to convey is that if individuals have proper purchasing power, it can lead to a virtuous cycle, right? Moreover, it also leads to a multiplier effect. What do you mean by multiplier effect? It means that the rise in the incomes of these individuals, of different individuals, is greater than the initial investment. See, every sort of business enterprises requires initial investment. But if it would produce more, if people would have more purchasing power, so the rise in the overall incomes would be higher than that of the initial investment. And that is what we talk about the multiplier effect, right? But the report also talks about a serious issue. It says that this multiplier effect, it depends on the proportion of consumption from incomes. See, please understand, you have the rich section, who in absolute terms, they consume a lot in absolute terms. But as a share, let's say this is a rich individual. So as a share of its total sort of expenditure, this would be only for consumption. But the majority of individuals, that is the low and the middle income individuals, their share of consumption is very much. Out of the total expenditure, their share is too huge. So what we see is that if you have got these people, if their sort of share in the consumption is reducing, then the multiplier effect would also reduce, right? If the majority of the people, if they reduce their consumption, why they would reduce? Because of lowering of the purchasing power. It would also lower down the multiplier effect. And multiplier effect, if it's lower down, it would obviously lead to sort of lower growth in the economy. Then what we see is, to illustrate this, what we can say is that the monopolies, they increase the prices of goods and services. It leads to reduction of consumption, and then it leads to weaker effect on the growth. Now, this also leads to the concept of unequal economy. What do you mean by unequal economy? See, this is a situation where the rise in the incomes of the rich people, it is more than that of the low and the middle income people, right? So the rich people are earning more in comparison to that of the low and the middle income people. Then we have got what are the effects of inequality on redistribution. If the redistribution happens, how can it reduce inequality? See, there are many economists who have talked about taxing the wealth, right? What do we mean by that? So you have got rich individuals and they have got accumulated a lot of wealth with them. So if we tax their wealth, it can lead to increased redistribution. And increased redistribution means what? Increase in the incomes. An increase in the incomes would mean sort of greater purchasing power. Greater purchasing power would mean increased multiplier effect. And then we can have this virtuous cycle, right? Now, talking about what would be its effect on the monopolies. See, it is but obvious that if you are increasing, if the incomes of people are increasing, if their purchasing power is increasing, it would also sort of restrict the monopolies. And then it would lead to sort of ultimately the increasing of purchasing power of the individuals. Now, we have got a very famous economist, Thomas Piketty, also known as modern Marx. So he has given some proposals. He's saying that you have got billionaires around the world. He says tax these billionaires, and the amount which comes out of these tax, use that for basic income to individuals. What it would do is, it would lead to the creation of new class of entrepreneurs. And then these entrepreneurs can create new startups. And they can thus be new employers. He says that. So what we see is that definitely redistribution is not something which is a silver bullet. Definitely, it's not a silver bullet. But there's a dire need to reduce this stark inequality. Also, we have got the directive principles of the state policy, Article 39, subclause B, which says that the state should direct its policies in such a manner that the material resources of the community should be distributed in such a way so that it subserves the common good. Then we have got Article 39 subclause C, which is again a directive to the state, which says that the operation of the economic system should make sure that it should not lead to the concentration of wealth. right? So these are also the directive to the state. So what we see is definitely there has been an increase in these rich people, stark increase in the inequality, but we need to have those policies so that the lower strata can also earn income with a greater pace, with a greater rate than these rich individuals. And only then we can ensure an equitable society. Now the next issue is with respect to the tribal vulnerability. So recently an incident happened in Madhya Pradesh where some of these tribals, they were deceived and sexually abused. Now we all know that these tribals have faced historical disadvantages. We'll try to look what are the issues faced by them and we'll see what can be the way forward. Now this relates to GS2 vulnerable sections and the government interventions. So talking about the definition of tribes. See, there have been certain communities in India who have faced extreme social, economic and educational backwardness. And why they have faced so? Because of primitive agricultural practices, because of lack of infrastructure facilities, and because of geographical isolation, right? And it is because of these factors that the constitution makers of India, they thought about sort of providing some safeguards to these communities. And these tribes were then deemed to be scheduled tribes under Article 342 of the Indian Constitution. So the Article 342 subclause 1 of the Indian Constitution says that the President of India may specify with respect to a particular state or union territory, after consultation with the governor, specific tribes or tribal communities as scheduled tribes with respect to that particular state or union territory. So the Article 342 subclause 2 says that the Parliament may by law include in or exclude from the list which is specified in Article 342 subclause 1. Right. So these are this is a very important provision in the Constitution which talks about the sort of designation of particular tribal group as a scheduled tribe. Now, what is the criteria for specifying a particular tribal group as a scheduled tribe? See, the Constitution is silent about such criteria. The Constitution nowhere mentions the criteria for designating a particular tribal group as a scheduled tribe. Now, what are the traits? But definitely, you have got some traits of these tribal communities. And this is primitiveness, geographical isolation, shyness and social, educational and economic backwardness. So these traits, if they are present in a particular tribal group, that can be designated as a scheduled tribes. Now, what is the sort of definition which is used? We have got the 1931 census and it gives the definition of tribal communities. And we use this definition to designate a particular tribal group as scheduled tribe, right? If we go about the sort of population, what we see is that as a percentage of total population, according to the census 2011, they constitute around 8.6% of the total population. That is around 10.4 crores, right? And there are over 700 scheduled tribes, 730 scheduled tribes to be precise. Now, if we talk about their geographical expanse, if you can just see in the map, you would see that the central belt of India, incorporating the states of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, right? And almost all the northeastern states, they are dominated by the prevalence of these scheduled tribes. Also, you have the Union Territory of Ladakh, which has almost all the people living as scheduled tribes. So that is what the geographical expanse is all about. Now, what are the issues with respect to the tribal vulnerability? The first is the land alienation and displacement. According to the Land Right Alliance, it says that since 1951, almost 6.6 million tribals have been displaced because of these projects, developmental projects. So what is the consequence? See, if these tribals are being displaced, it will naturally lead to loss of livelihoods. And what are their livelihoods? Hunting, gathering, shifting cultivation. So it leads to sort of loss of livelihoods. Then you have got environmental degradation. See, if you remove tribal groups, we all know that these tribal groups, they have adopted nature-based solutions for the preservation of environment. And once the tribals are displaced, it leads to the environment degradation. Then you have got, it also leads to social dispossession, as it leads to the loss of their cultural identity, which is associated with the forests. Then they also lack basic amenities and infrastructure. So the census of 2011 says that only 8.6% of the total tribal population in India has had sort of piped water supply. Right. Then what are the consequences? See, because of lack of these basic amenities, what happens is that they have got sort of very bad health indicators, and there is lack of water, sanitation and hygiene facilities. Right. Then it also leads to limited education, because if you don't have educational facilities, it would obviously lower their literacy rates. Then it also leads to poor healthcare access. There are absolutely no sort of hospitals in these tribal areas. Very bad healthcare is provided. Even if you have the healthcare, very bad services are provided. Right. Then it also leads to, there's an issue of exploitation and marginalization. This is what we are discussing. This is a news article is all about. So according to the NCRB data, there has been a continuous increase in the crimes against STs, especially with respect to 2016 and 17. So there has been an increase. So what is the consequence? See, most of these tribes, they are vulnerable to trafficking. They are vulnerable to sexual exploitation, especially the women and the child. Right? They are under the debt bondage. What does it mean? These tribals, they actually fall prey to the money lenders, and then ultimately they are prey to this debt bondage. Then it also leads to social exclusion. See, we have got this discrimination, and this discrimination leads to sort of excluding this section from the society, and then ultimately it leads to marginalization. Then we have got resource depletion and environment degradation. According to the Center for Science and Environment, it says that these developmental projects in India, especially in these forest areas, have had devastating impact on these tribals. What are the consequences? Loss of biodiversity. As I said, that these tribals, they have their own sort of practices, own customs and tradition, which are in line, which are in sync, which are aligned to sort of environment preservation. And once you displace these people, it leads to sort of loss of biodiversity. Then it also leads to livelihood insecurity, because once you have displaced these people, they have no other options to do, no other livelihood options. So it leads to livelihood insecurity. Then inadequate governance and representation. What we see is that there were just 47 MPs who were from the scheduled tribes out of the 543. Right. So there is a consequence. What is the consequence? Consequence is there's lack of voice. If you don't have these STs in the representatives as your representatives in the decision-making process, it would ultimately hamper their own interest. Right. Ineffective implementation of policies, because there is no sort of bottom-up approach. There is a top-down approach, and thus it leads to sort of a situation where the interests of the tribals are not catered to. So these are the various issues which tribals face. Now, what have been the government interventions? The first is the constitutional safeguards. So we have the 5th schedule to the Indian Constitution, which talks about the administration and control of scheduled areas and scheduled tribes. Then we have got the 6th schedule, which specifically talks about the administration of the scheduled tribes in the states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram. Right. Then what are these special component plans and the tribal sub-plans? See, these are the specific funds. These are the specific funds which are earmarked for these scheduled tribes, so that these funds can be diverted for their development. However, the report by the CAG says that there has been a gross misutilization of this fund, that is tribal sub-plan and the special component plans. Now, what have been the schemes with respect to the educational development? So there have been schemes like Eklavya model residential schools. There have been sort of scholarships for these scheduled tribes, and it has definitely led to increase in the literacy rates of these tribals. Then we have got the economic development. So we have the initiatives, like the TriFed, Tribal Cooperative Marketing and Development Federation of India, which focuses upon the marketing and the branding of the tribal products. Then we have got skill development programs, which focus upon the vocational enhancement of these tribals, right? Then we have got the land rights and forest management. One of the very important laws is the Forest Right Acts. It empowers or it entitles the forest dwelling communities with land rights, with forest rights, right? So it entitles them, it empowers them with these rights, right? Now, what are the ways in which we can sort of reduce this tribal vulnerability and ultimately promote their development? The first is strengthening and fast track implementation of existing laws. We already saw that we have laws like Forest Rights Act of 2006. So what we need to do is we need to empower these people. We need to make sure that the rights guaranteed by under this law, they are actually, people make use of them. We also have one of the very important laws, that is Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas, PISA, in order to empower these tribal groups, to enhance the local governance, right? So next is that there needs to be community driven planning. What do we mean by that? What we mean is that there needs to be a bottom up approach, and not a top down approach, so that the interests of these tribals can be aligned in the developmental process. Community driven planning. Then we need to focus upon sustainable livelihoods. We need to provide these communities with adequate livelihoods. For example, ecotourism. We have got ecotourism. We have got organic farming. So these are the avenues where the tribals can find suitable employment opportunities, right? Next is there needs to be an improvement in the infrastructure and quality of education. Very important. The most important instrument is that of education. We need to empower these people through proper educational facilities, which also include not just education but also vocational training, right? Then we need to minimize their displacement. We need to make sure that these developmental projects, especially in the forest regions, they should not be focusing upon the displacement of these tribals. And if the displacement is unavoidable, what you need to have is proper rehabilitation and compensation, right? Finally, there needs to be a transparency in the allocation and utilization of funds. As I said, the CAG report highlighted that the funds are being grossly misused. So there needs to be a proper grievance redressal mechanism, right? And there needs to be proper transparent system. So the funding, so that the funds which are meant for the development of these tribes can be used for the same purpose. So what we see is that these are the ways to empower these tribes. And if they would be empowered, naturally, these vulnerabilities would automatically reduce. And then we can ensure that they also become a part of the mainstream society. So the next article is with respect to the energy transition. So what we see is that there has been an enhanced focus on the green energy transition. And this article says that there needs to be a different policy framework required for this transition to take place. Now, this is with respect to GS3, energy and sustainable development. Now, we all know that climate change is real. And primarily, the reason is anthropogenic. That is, it is human-induced. It is human-induced climate change. And we have got data to validate this. So we have got the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, of US, which said that 2023 was on record the warmest year, with the combined temperature increasing 1.18 degrees Celsius over the 20th century average. Then we had this National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration of US, which says that the CO2 concentration in the atmospheres have increased to 420 ppm, parts per million. And we all know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. So it is nothing but what it is doing is that it is enhancing the global warming, rise in the temperature. Then the NASA has also said that the global sea level has risen over 20 centimeters from 1880, right? And the rate of this acceleration, the rate of this rise of the sea level has been accelerating, right? Then you have got the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. What it says is that the extreme weather events like the heat waves, droughts, floods, wildfires have increased in terms of their frequency, in terms of their intensity, right? So climate change is real. What we mean is that we need to have proper policies in place so that we can make a sort of green transition to mitigate the ill effects of climate change. Now, what have been the India's actions to actually take the path of green transition? So it is primarily two-pronged. There are two strategies which India has taken. The first is managing and mitigating the import dependency on petroleum. Now we all know that how much India is dependent on the petroleum imports, that of crude oil and natural gas, right? Second strategy is that of accelerating the transition to clean renewables, that is solar, wind, right? So these are the two prime strategies which India has adopted. And these were also highlighted by the Prime Minister at the COP, Conference of Parties in Glasgow, where he said that India has taken 5 goals, that India has taken the concept of Panchamrit, right? And among others, it includes, for example, net zero by 2070, reducing the carbon intensity of GDP, 500 gigawatts of electricity to come from non-fossil fuel based sources by the year 2030. So these are some of the goals which India has aspired for. Now, these are very ambitious goals, but there are huge challenges which India faces, especially with respect to the sustainable energy transition. What are these challenges? The first thing is that this strategy which India has adopted, the two-pronged strategy, that is the first of managing and mitigating the import dependence on petroleum, and the second is accelerating the transition to the renewables. Both these strategies, they are handled by multiple ministries. Please understand. We have the Ministry of Coal, we have the Ministry of Petroleum, we have the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, we have the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, we have the Ministry of Mines, we have the Ministry of Heavy Industries, Information Technology. So what we see is that all these ministries, they operate in silos. And what happens is that it leads to sort of inefficiency in decision making, right? And also it leads to suboptimal planning. So there is no formal executive platform. There is no sort of a proper forum where these executive decisions can be made. This lacks sort of integrated decision making, right? So what the need is, the need should be that we need to have an integrated value chain. We need to make sure that we have a common platform of all these ministries where proper discussions can take place, where proper policy formulation can take place, and an integrated value chain, energy value chain should be considered, right? Next, what we see is the external situation. We have the Cold War 2.2, that is between the US and China. And especially that is in context of the technological race, that is the new and emerging technologies. And this has actually led to a situation where the climate agenda, the green agenda, has come on a backseat, right? Next, what we see is that there has been a Chinese monopoly when it comes to the manufacturing of these supplies of critical minerals, lithium, niobium, chromium. So these are the minerals which are used in sort of battery manufacturing, electric vehicles. And China has got a monopoly over these supplies of these products. Now this also includes the solar modules. It also includes the EV components, that is the battery storage, right? So what it does is that it increases the vulnerabilities of countries like India who are dependent on these imports. So what should be the way forward? What should be the way forward for India? See, the first thing is that it needs to have a strategic framework, a long-term framework when it comes to sort of the green transition on the lines of the Chips and Science Act of the United States. So what we mean to say is that there needs to be a legislative framework, a legislative backing to enhance the technology and financial resources. Next is that there needs to be the enhancement of the scope of production-linked incentive schemes. We already have this for mobile phones. So similarly, we can also have for electric vehicles or battery manufacturing, right? Next, we need to have sort of strategic plans for securing critical minerals. India should make sort of agreements with countries of South America, with countries of Africa, so as to secure reliable supply of these critical minerals, cobalt, lithium, right? Then what we see is that the government is not only responsible for this green transition, the private sector must also contribute. There needs to be a private participation. See, if you have a lot of government funding, it also leads to the effect of the crowding out of funds. So what we need to make sure that the private sort of enterprises need to come forward for implementing or sort of taking part in this green transition. Next, we need to have reduced fossil fuel usage. How we can do that? We already have biofuels, right? We have got the ethanol blending program. So such initiatives need to be strengthened. New initiatives should be there, right? So what we see is that definitely India has set a very ambitious target for itself, and it is doable. It is very much doable. However, we need proper policies in place so that a proper transition, a smooth transition, a green transition can take place. So the next article is with respect to the issue of glass ceiling. So recently, the LinkedIn economic graph has placed some data which points towards the sort of lack of participation of women in the workforce. And it says that this progress has been stalled since 2022 and has declined in 2024. Now, it is with respect to the GS2, social issues and women. Now, what does the word glass ceiling means? See, it is primarily a metaphor which talks about the unseen yet very real barriers. So you can see that a woman is trying to scale her career up, right? But there are some real barriers which are not visible, right? They're intangible. Those barriers can be termed as glass ceiling, right? Which hinder the sort of growth of an individual. Now, this is primarily associated with respect to the management positions, And it is talked often in the context of women and also minorities, right? So it's not just about the women that we study the glass ceiling effect, it's also about the minorities. Now, talking about the key aspects. See, as I said, it is an intangible barrier. That is, reasons exist, but you cannot directly attribute that these are the reasons. There are reasons for the hindered growth of these individuals, but they cannot be there are no formal rules or regulations which prohibit these individuals from excelling in their career or transitioning to a higher level. Then it limits advancement. It is obvious that if you have such hindrances, it limits the advances to scaling to a higher level. Thus, especially in the context of women and minorities, they usually face huge difficulties when it comes to becoming a part of the top management, right? Now, what are the reasons for its existence? See, the reason is that there are unconscious biases. There are unconscious reasons in the mind. For example, a question mark on the capabilities of these women or minorities, whether they would be able to perform as per the expectations or not, right? Then there are lack of role models. See, women and minorities, especially minority, I mean to say linguists, it can be anything, the linguistic minorities or ethnic minorities or religious minorities. So there are very few people, women leaders, there are very few leaders from the minority community who are placed at top positions. So the lack of role models, it also does not inspire people to actually pursue these goals. Then there are work-life balance challenges, especially in the context of women. See, especially in countries like India, we have got women who share dual responsibility, dual burden. That is also of the professional and the personal life. So it also leads to hindering their progress when it comes to their professional domain. Now, what the report talks about is that the representation of women across workforce, it was increasing, especially from 2016. You can see it has been increasing from 23.9% when it comes to all across the workforce, and it increased to 27.3% in 2022. But it stagnated in 2023, and it ultimately declined to 26.8%. You can see the chart one. Right. It shows that there are some factors which are responsible for this. Right. It also talks about the senior leadership positions. This has also declined from 18.7% to 18.3%. Now, if we talk about the other developments which the report talks about, it says that the promotion of women to higher roles has been snail-paced. That is, from the year 2016-19, that is 4 years, 1% increase was seen in the participation of women. And similarly, from 2019 and 22, 4 years, again 1% was seen. So it shows the stagnant growth, right? So next it talks about, in the chart 2, it says that there has been gradual rise of women when it comes to certain specific sectors. So look at this chart 2. It says that it shows the women's entry and career progression in certain sectors. For example, oil and gas, mining, construction, transportation, logistics. In these sectors, the participation of women, especially at the top levels, is very less. For example, it is only 10% when it comes to the oil and gas industry. Then there are some sectors which see a moderate share in specific sectors. We have the sectors like accommodation and food services. We have the sectors like technology, information and media, retail, financial services. Over there, what you see, there has been a sort of moderate participation of women. Then there are sectors which share relatively high in few sectors. We have got the education, we have got the administrative and support services, we have got the government administration, we have got the professional services. In these services, also hospitals and healthcare, you see a good share of women participation, right? So what we see is that there are some sectors where the women participation is very less, and the reasons can be attributed to these intangible barriers, that is a glass ceiling. So there needs to be a comprehensive, a multifaceted approach to break this glass ceiling. What we need to do is we need to get rid of these unconscious biases, right? We need to give proper opportunities. There needs to be proper recruitment drives, active recruitment drives to include women, to include people from these minorities. Only then we can ensure that there is equitable development. There's an equal development. And ultimately, this glass ceiling can be broken down. So the next article is with respect to the James Webb Space Telescope. So recently, the James Webb Space Telescope has made a recent discovery when it comes to finding one of the earliest galaxies that is 2% of its current age. Now, this is with respect to the science and technology. So, first of all, what is James Webb Space Telescope? See, this is a large infrared telescope, right? It observes the infrared part of the radiations. Astronomical observations are based on infrared observations. Now, this is in collaboration with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, European Space Agency, and Canadian Space Administration. It was launched in December 2021, right? Now, this is a successor to the Hubble Space Telescope. Hubble Space Telescope, it was primarily focused on the observations, including the infrared, the ultraviolet, and the visible spectrum. But the James Webb is specifically focused on the infrared observations. What are the special features of this James Webb Space Telescope? See, the first is it is located at the Lagrange point 2. Now, what is Lagrange points? See, you can see this is Sun and this is the Earth. And there are few points where the gravitational force of both these bodies, they counteract and nullify each other, right? So we have got the L1 Lagrange point over here between the Sun and the Earth. We have got the Lagrange point 2 that is beyond the Earth. Then we have got the Lagrange point 3 that is on the opposite side. And then we have got the Lagrange point 4 and Lagrange point 5, right? So this James Webb Space Telescope, it is placed at Lagrange point 2 so that it can observe the galaxies which are placed at great distances and then can make suitable findings, right? Next is it, as I said, that it works primarily in the infrared astronomy, right? Then it has a large primary mirror. You can just see this from the top, it looks like this image, and then from the bottom it looks like this. So you have got a primary mirror which is composed of 18 hexagonal segments made from metal beryllium and coated with gold to capture the faint infrared light, right? It is having a very high precision, right? Then it has a cryogenic cooling system. So please understand that you have the heat from the sun. So in order to protect from the heat of the sun, you have this cryogenic cooling system, right? So this cooling system makes sure that the instruments in this telescope, they are not affected and a proper study can be made. Then sun shield protection. So this is a shield which protects the instruments from the harmful radiations of the sun, from the heat, and make sure that these studies are carried on, are taken properly. Now, what are the objectives of James Webb Space Telescope? The first is it looks for the galaxies. It looks for the galaxies that were formed once the event of Big Bang happened. Once initially the universe actually from the singularity, it expanded and then led to the Big Bang, and led to the formation of the universe, right? Then it also determines the evolution, as I said, the evolution of galaxies. Different galaxies have evolved over time, right? And then it looks into how these evolution has taken place. In what way the one galaxy is different from the other, right? It also examines the process of star creation. That is how a particular star gets formed, right? What are the processes involved? Then it investigates the potential for life in planetary systems. That is, it looks whether there can be any planets where the possibility of life exists, right? Now, what is the significance of this telescope? See, it is advancing astrophysical knowledge. That is, it is advancing our knowledge with respect to the origin of the space, with respect to how the evolution of space has been done. Then, as I said, exoplanet exploration, whether the life exists or not in the other planets. Then it is also useful for educational and scientific collaboration. There are different universities, there are different research institutes around the world which are using the data which is gathered by the James Webb Space Telescope, and it is furthering their research. Then it is a catalyst for future space missions. It would lead to a situation where we have got a proper knowledge with respect to the origin of a particular galaxy, and then proper missions can be made for investigating this further. Now, what have been the key observations which have been drawn by the James Webb Space Telescope? See, the first is cosmic dawn. Cosmic dawn refers to the first few 100 million years after the Big Bang occurred. So, the formation of galaxies during that time is referred to as cosmic dawn. So, the James Webb Space Telescope is helping us to know about the formation of galaxies during this period. Then, it has also led to the development or to know about the galaxy cluster which happened around 4.6 billion years ago, right? Then it has also given us the deepest infrared image about the oldest galaxies which were formed, one of the oldest galaxies. It also has led to the information about the monster galaxies which were formed just after 500 to 600 million years after the Big Bang occurred, right? And there were also the galaxies which were as old as Milky Way, which have been seen through the James Webb Space Telescope. So what we see is that this has definitely been a sort of a transition, a good transition from the Hubble Space Telescope, and the James Webb Space Telescope is definitely something which is providing value-added information, very important information with respect to the galaxy formation, the origin of the universe. Now coming to the prelim snippet section, we have got the first article as CCIC, that is the Central Cottage Industrial Corporation. Now this is a body which is under the supervision of Ministry of Textiles, and it primarily looks into the promotion, development and marketing of quality Indian handloom products, right? So it makes sure, it helps these handicraftsmen so that they can do their branding, and then ultimately it can market those products and make sure that those handicraftsmen, they get adequate livelihood opportunities. So it promotes the self-help groups in this domain, and it also helps these small handicraftsmen. So it has a primary emporium at Janpath in Delhi. So just remember that. Next is that China has once again achieved a remarkable feat when it comes to landing its satellite spacecraft on the moon, right? So we have got this Chang'e 6 mission, right? And on June 1st, China has successfully landed on the far side of the moon. So China has landed the uncrewed spacecraft on the far side of the moon, that is known as Chang'e 6 mission. Now see, this word Chang'e, it primarily denotes in Chinese language the goddess of moon, right? So it talks about the goddess of moon. Now it's a robotic lunar exploration. What it would do is that it would go and it would collect samples and would try to bring it back. So it would allow to obtain a sample of soil and rock from the far side of the moon. And also it would try to drill and get the subsurface samples from the moon, right? It would collect up to 2 kilograms of the sample and also from the subsurface samples. Now as I said, the Chang'e 6 has successfully landed on the far side of the moon, that is known as the Apollo crater. So you need to remember this. Now talking about one of the very important organizations, and that is OPEC and OPEC Plus. So we have got the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and we have got the OPEC Plus. Now see, we have got few countries. You can just look at the map. The dark colored countries are a part of the OPEC, right? We have got these countries of Saudi Arabia, then Venezuela. These are the part of OPEC. Now, what does OPEC primarily do? See, if you want to understand this, just think of OPEC as a cartel, as a syndicate of few sort of oil producing nations who try to control the supply of oil in the market and ultimately their prices, right? And what they have done is that OPEC, along with sort of the allies of Russia, known as OPEC Plus, they have strengthened this cartel, right? And the headquarter is situated in Vienna, Austria. So it majorly does a sort of a collective influence when it comes to the supply of oil, of these oil, and ultimately affects the price. So just remember that. Next, one of the very important issues in the international relations has been that of the Ukraine, right? So it becomes very important for us to just look around, to just have a good knowledge about the Ukraine. So just see in the map that you have got these countries who actually surround Ukraine. You have got Russia, you've got Belarus, you've got Poland, you've got Slovakia, you've got Hungary, you've got Romania, you've got Moldova. Right? These are the countries. Now, there are some specific cities and regions which become really important. One more thing is that you have got the Sea of Azov, and here you have the Black Sea. And there is a strait known as the Strait of Kerch. So do remember this. There are few cities which become very important which can be very important for your upcoming prelims. For example, you have got two regions in Ukraine, that is Donetsk and Luhansk. Now, these are controlled by Moscow-based extremists. These regions are in sort of Ukraine, but they're controlled by Moscow-backed extremists. So you've got Luhansk and Donetsk. Next, some of the very important cities can be, first is Bakhmut. Then you have got the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. There was there, and the Russia attacked this nuclear power plant, and there were concerns of nuclear meltdown, right? Then there's a city of Odessa, right? So these are some of the important cities. We have Kharkiv, right? We have got Mariupol over here. We have got the Crimean Peninsula. Now, this was actually annexed in the year 2014. And this eastern part, you can see, which is primarily in the red, it indirectly or directly has Russian control over it, right? So just remember this. So this is all for today. I hope you really enjoyed the session. All the best.